Hey guys, Joe Pye here. Welcome back to the shop. You know, I had a viewer request that we do a video on taps, and I thought, how much is there really to know about a tap? And then I started thinking, there's quite a bit to know about a tap, especially when you go to a catalog that's 3 inches thick and they have 7,000 different taps, and all you need is just something to make a thread. So I'm going to go over a couple of details, what they're called, what they do, and maybe some details that you didn't know that you could incorporate into your purchase, and let's do it. Basically, there are a million different kinds of taps, but if you ask someone, hey, name 3 taps, they're going to tell you taper, plug, and bottom. And the words are pretty self-explanatory. A taper tap has an extremely long nose on it. Taper taps are specifically designed for harder, tougher materials, and the trade-off for that particular design, the long nose tap, is that you lose a lot of threads when you run a taper tap into a part. I mean, you could be anywhere 7 to 10 threads into that hole before you get your first full thread. So a taper tap is not something you want to use on a shallow bottom hole. It's definitely not going to work out for you. Taper tap, longest nose, 7 to 10 threads ish, could be 6, could be 11. I know someone's going to correct me on that, by all means, but there you go. Taper tap. Plug tap. A plug tap is probably the tap that you're going to find most often just laying around. It's very similar to the taper tap, but it doesn't have as long a nose. You're going to lose about 3 to 5 threads on a plug tap before you get your first full thread. Plug tap is very common. They all come in 3 flute, 2 flute, 4 flute, whatever you want to buy. Depending on the material that you're cutting, the harder the material, the tougher the material, I would say the more flutes you're going to want to buy. So although a 2 flute tap will work on stainless, it's probably not going to hold up as long as a 3 flute or a 4 flute. Try saying that 3 times fast. Okay, that's a plug tap. Taper tap is longer, plug tap is next. Now the bottom tap. Bottom tap has a real short lead on it. And this is anywhere 1 to 2 threads here. And that's primarily if you have a bottomed hole, which is why it's called a bottom tap, and you need to run the threads all the way down to the bottom of that hole. You're going to want to start with a plug tap, and then you're going to want to follow it with a bottom tap. Now the load on a bottom tap is a lot more because you don't have the gradual increase in material being removed by the next tooth in line on something that's going to take 5, 6, 7 teeth to give you your first thread. So a bottom tap should be a follow-up tap. After you make a feature, then throw the bottom tap in there and you're good to go. There's also a thing called a roll tap. A roll tap doesn't have any flutes at all. It actually looks like a screw. But if you look at the top of a roll tap, it looks like this. Now a roll tap works very much the way standing or walking in mud works. When you step into the soft material or the soft soil or the mud, your foot's going to go down and you're going to displace material coming up from either side, right? Well, a roll tap works exactly the same way. It's an incredibly strong thread when you're done with a roll tap because it's formed. It realigns all the grains in the material and it cuts into the bore as much as it displaces the material out. So it's a formed thread and there's no chips. It's very cool. But it takes a lot of pressure to drive these things in. Definitely not something you're going to drive in by hand. And very specialized. It's a nice resultant thread on that. Much larger pilot hole. Because of the displacement, the hole actually closes in around the tap. And there you go. So that would be a roll tap. When you buy a tap, you're going to see some threads are called cut threads, some threads are called ground. Now I've noticed as the thread runs out at the back of the tap, you're going to see this. There's the nose of the tap. Now, that's pretty pathetic, but you're just going to have to work with me on this. The thread that's formed on that particular tap is nice and straight for a while, and then it blends out to the OD of the tap. So if you drive one of these into your hole too far, you're going to start to damage the threads that you've just cut in with the front of the tap. So hold your tap up to the light and see if you have a nice sharp thread all the way to the end. That would be the ground taps. The ground tap is the one that's going to take you all the way to the end like that. You can drive these in a lot farther than you can drive in a cut tap. It's just a fact, you just can't. There's no run out. You can run this all the way down into your hole, right to the last thread, and then back it out. All is golden. Now, what tap do you use for what kind of hole? Well, what kind of hole do you have? Is it a bottomed hole? Is it a very controlled depth bottom hole? Is it a through hole? What's the material? What's the percentage of thread that you want? Okay, now you're overwhelmed. Cake, right? You have a plate. You have two types of holes that you can put in that plate. You can have a bottom hole. You can have a through hole. A bottom hole is something that you got to be real careful about when you're running a tap, running a thread, depending on the type of tap that you use. Normally, taps have a tendency to pack up the chips in the flute on a straight flute tap, but the spiral points and the gun taps, and I'll tell you what that is in a second, well, as you're cutting the threads into the part, it's displacing all the chips down into the bottom of the hole. So if your tap is down in here and all the chips are chasing the forward motion of the tap, chances are you're going to cheat yourself, or you're going to end up snapping the tap, or you're going to have a buildup of threads or chips in the bottom of that hole. It's going to feel like solid material when you go in there with your dental pick or your bent paper clip, which I do a lot of bending paper clips, and get down in there with a hook and fish all that stuff out. If you have a through hole, a plug tap, or what they call a spiral point tap, is really good. It's the tap that has the profile that looks like this. This would be a two flute. Comes to a point, but they put an additional grind right in the tip on both sides that fades out into the body of the tap. And what this does is, since it's called a gun tap or a spiral point tap, it pushes the material forward of the cut and is ideal for use on a through hole application. If you were to use a gun tap on a bottomed hole, you are going to get all the chips built up in the bottom of the hole. If you use a gun tap on a through hole, all the chips are going to come out the bottom of the hole in a nice long string right at the lead of your tap, and you're going to be thrilled with the result because none of the chips are going to build up in the flutes of your tap. Okay, you have a bottom hole, but you have a million bottom holes, and the last thing you want to do is pay somebody to sit there with a pick and drag all those chips out of the hole. Well, you have two options. Two options. If possible, and the part will allow, and the engineers will allow, and everything goes well, you can make the hole deeper. If this is your thread plane, make the hole deeper. The chips are still going to pack up in the bottom, but they're not going to pack up rock solid, and it'll be a whole lot easier to get them out. That's one option. Another option is to use a thing called a high spiral tap. Now, a high spiral tap, when you look at it from the side, it looks exactly like a spiral staircase. And this is intended to extract the debris as the tap is going in. And it works very well. If you set it up right and you lubricate it right, speeds and feeds, material, everything, planets line up, when you drive the tap in, you can see the little curls come straight out either side, and then when the tap backs out, you have a clean hole. High spiral taps are the best when it comes to not wanting to do any secondary work on a large amount of tapped holes in bottomed hole application. All right. Number of flutes. The softer the material, just like an end mill, the fewer the flutes that you need. Aluminum, 2 flute fine, brass, plastic, whatever, 2 flutes fine. Start getting into the mild steels, 3 flute might be better. Start getting into harder steels, a larger flute, a coated tap, a 4 flute tap. All of these things come into play the harder the material gets. I work with a lot of aluminum. A lot of the taps that I use are the spiral point plug taps and the high spiral taps, and they work just fine. If you're going to plate, anodize, powder coat a thread, chances are you're going to chase that thread out when you're done if it's a powder coat, because that's a big buildup. But something harder like a chrome plate or a nickel plate or some type of ornamental anodize, you're going to want to use a tap that's going to allow for a surface buildup that will still allow your gauge to go in or your mating feature to go in, and that's controlled by, in imperial threads anyway in the US, there's a G designation on the thread. So if you buy a tap that's, let's say, half 13 G3, 2s and 3s are very common, but if you want that to cut bigger because you know you're going to put plating in there or anodizing in there, this number here normally is a 5/10 thousandths or a half a thousandth bigger on the thread. So if you're going to put a big powder coat on a half 13, you want to go at G4, G5. It's going to make a bigger thread that's going to feel a little bit loose to the gauge. But after you get it back from powder coat or plating, you're golden. If you go to a thread chart and look for a specific drill, the thread chart may say percentage of thread. Now, the higher the percentage of thread, the more of the actual thread form you have down inside that hole, the harder it's going to be to cut that thread because you have more of the tap engaged. So if you have a tougher material, a stainless or something with a lot of nickel in it, you're going to want a lower percentage of thread, like a 60 or a 55% percentage of thread, because it's just going to be easier to tap that hole. And you'd be surprised at the difference in the diameters of the drills that it tells you to use for different percentages of threads. It's really not that much. So know your application. 60-65% thread is good. If it starts being a problem, open up the hole a little bit bigger if you're drilling stainless and stuff like that. Coatings. You can get so many different coatings on your taps nowadays that it's almost overwhelming when you go to the catalog and you're seeing all these scientific designations on the tap. You have no idea what you're looking at. The gold taps, the titanium nitride gold taps, are very applicable across the board. I still use coolant on mine. A lot of guys say, oh no, you don't have to use coolant on a titanium coated tap, but I do. And the titanium nitride coating is a TIN. So you'll see people that refer to it as a tin coating. It's actually TI, titanium nitride, tin coat. There's a new one out now, or at least new to me. I think it's a titanium aluminum nitride. It's black or dark gray. And the end mills that I use in my shop on my stainless are all this titanium aluminum oxide coated, and it is tough stuff, real good. These coatings also apply a lubricity to the surface of the metal so that you don't get a cold fusion. It allows the material to flow across the cutting flutes a lot better. All right, so we got the number of leads in a plug, taper, and bottom tap. The spiral point, a gun tap, shoots the chips forward. A high spiral tap brings the chips out. Number of flutes versus the toughness of the material. Tougher the material, the more flutes. The tougher the material, the longer lead you want on the tap, which is why taper taps are good. They do have their place. They're not across the board applicable, but they do have their place. The thread feature, bottom versus through, type of tap you can use, and the percentage of thread in coatings. And I think that just about clears it up. That's going to be about as clear as mud, right? So A lot of catalogs that will offer you taps should offer you a technical introduction to the type of tap. You can refer back to this. If I said anything wrong, guys, by all means comment, be kind. But this is my personal experience, and I've had a tremendous amount of success. And I usually use just 2 or 3 different types of taps. I don't have 100 different styles and types of taps in my toolbox, but I do have 1,000,000 different taps. Anyway, I will follow this video up shortly with a close-up on the different types of tips so you know what you're looking at. And then I'm going to run a part 2. There's that 2 thing going on again. I will run a part 2 of this with all the different varieties of drivers for taps, because I got a couple of really neat attachments out there to show you. So tune in for part 2, and that'll post shortly. All right, let's take a look at the taps. Hey guys, I'm going to show you the difference here in the different types of taps. This is a plug tap, 3 flute. You can see the several number of leads on this tap that are compromised by the mild taper on it. This is considered a bright tap, and it's also a cut thread tap because you can see the full thread runs right to the back or full diameter of the tap body. We're going to do a side-by-side comparison here of this exact same tap in a spiral point profile. You can see the additional cut that I referred to on the board. And that little cut right there takes the chips in the front of the tap and blows it down to the bottom of the hole or through the plate that you're working on. You can see that this one starts to run out. So this would be the cut thread tap. If I call the other one a cut thread, I meant ground thread. So this is a cut thread tap, and you can see that as it runs out, if you were to run this down into your part, you'd start to bell mouth the top of the part. So take a good look at your taps and know what type of tap that you're using. This is your bottom tap. So you can see if these were run down to the same depth, how many more threads you would get out of a bottom tap. Quite a few. But I don't suggest putting a bottom tap down in the hole before you put a plug tap or a taper tap down in there. This is a surface treated tap. You can see the color difference. This is a black oxided tap. And I'll see if I can actually get the camera to pick up the color. That's more like it right there. One's nice and shiny like polished chrome, and the other one's a very black, very dark gray. That is a 4 flute tap because it has 4 cutting surfaces, and it is a 4 flute bottom tap. We'll go back to the spiral point, and I'm going to show you a high spiral. You can see, like I said, about being a staircase. This is the tap, this is the high spiral tap that will extract the chips from the hole. If you have a bottom hole application, this is the type of tap that you're going to want to use. So this will push the chips through the hole, and this will pull the chips out of the hole. These guys here, which I failed to cover on the board, are called pipe taps. And if you have a pipe thread that you need to run, these taps are tapered like the end of a pipe. And they come in a variety of different sizes. If you have a pipe size, chances are there's a tap for it. And as you drive these in, naturally, since it's a taper, outward taper, not an inward taper at the nose, the further you drive this in, the more surface contact you have, and these guys can get relatively hard to drive down into the material. So make sure you keep them oiled up. Let's go with one more. There is absolutely no helix to this thread on this tap. This is the type of tap that all the chips would end up packed up in the flutes of the tap. This is a very mild plug tap. You can see that there's, since the thread is so fine, 3 or 4 threads doesn't go very far onto the tap, so it may look like a bottom tap at first glance. But since there's no helix, there's no spiral to these flutes on this cutting tap, the chips will probably build up in here, and this would be more likely to pull the chips out of the hole as well, but not as aggressively as a high spiral tap. That's all we got. Well, I hope you got something out of that. There's an awful lot to talk about when it comes to taps. There's quite a few different surface coatings and profiles and applications, but I hope that what I just told you sheds some light on what you see when you go and look in the catalog. Now, I do have a correction to make. I was talking about the size of the tap if you're going to anodize or chrome plate or powder coat. It's an H designation, not a G designation. So all you guys that are already typing in the corrections in the comment line, I beat you to it, so now you have to delete your comment. Anyway, that's all I got. If you have any questions, post it in the comment line below. If you like what you just saw, please subscribe. Joe Pazinski, Advanced Innovations, Austin, Texas. I'm out.